we have went from a world that has had much more hunger issues, and now we do live in a world statistically that has much more obesity issues.
We do.
Right? So again, I'm of the thought that the constant, like telling people, we have limited resources is, quite honestly, it's bull. Yo, what's up? It's AJ with Hippie Fertilizing on the More Than Grass podcast. And today we have back Justin with Grapon Gardens. Thank you for coming back, man.
Oh, thank you for having me. I have had so much fun working on this with you and getting to share some knowledge with people.
Yeah, you're most welcome. So we have something exciting. Justin and I tend to like rabbit trail off into lots of different topics. Yes, we know about grass, lawns, soil, gardening, plants, right? But there's so much more than that. And today we really want to bring you quite a big piece of how much more there is than just grass.
Oh yeah.
Right?
We're about to get deep.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
Woo!
I'm excited.
So Justin, what is the book that we have jumped into?
So I finished reading, AJ's been working on it for a second round, and it's called The Alchemy of Air.
Yes. So just like, I want to kind of resonate on that for a second. The Alchemy of Air. And one of the things they say in that book, it talks about turning air into bread.
Yeah.
Right? So let's talk a little bit, dive into what that is, what that means, and how it impacts us.
Yeah.
Right?
When I was first reading the book, I was listening to like how they take air and like break it down into other parts. And I was just like, this is brilliant. Why? Like, how did somebody think of this?
Right. And something, as we get into it, something that comes across my mind all the time, and I want to be something that we chew on quite a bit in our thoughts for everyone, is there's always talk of limited resources in the world, right? Food, water, air, soil, you name it. I am of the belief that, yes, the earth is a limited place for the most part, but it's freaking gigantic.
It is.
Right? And if it was that much limited, then how is it that we have been able to feed roughly 7, almost 8 billion people on Earth? So to some degree, it doesn't quite add up to me on the limited thing. They even say it in The Alchemy of Air that we have went from starvation, and it's still a thing in many places, but it's usually due to financial things, war, and
just the pure inability of getting the food where it needs to be at. I mean, it's at least in today's world, we do not live in a world where there is a lack of food. There's an inability to get the food where it needs to be at now.
Right.
There's just logistical challenges to get the food to people who are hungry.
Logistic, and come on, let's be honest too. I think it's also boils down to like controlling the resource.
Absolutely.
Right. So then that also goes back to like financial gains of some sort, or not, even if it's not financial gains, it's just control. Right.
Oh yeah.
You control.
When people are hungry, they're easy to manipulate.
Yes. A starving person will do much more things for something than a person who is not starving.
Yeah.
Now on the flip side of that, we have went from a world that has had much more hunger issues, and now we do live in a world statistically that has much more obesity issues.
We do.
Right. So again, I'm of the thought that the constant, like telling people, we have limited resources is, quite honestly, it's bull.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even like just like everything exists in a circular loop, right? Like the nitrogen exists in a nitrogen cycle. It gets built, it gets broke down, it gets used. It doesn't disappear. It's never going to disappear. You can't make things poof. They just change form.
Right. And so how can we be more efficient with these cycles?
Yeah.
And how can we transport things better in a safe manner,
Right.
in a way that's not harming our environment, impacting ecology in such a negative way?
Yeah.
And how all that stuff is. So sorry guys, I went off on a little tangent there.
Well, let's dive into the beginning of the book, right? So in the beginning of the book, there's a lot of historical references that are made, giving backlog to, kind of what was the preset stage for where we're at today, right? How did we feed the world before the modern development of synthetic nitrogen, right? They talk about rotating crops, and they learned that there's cover crops like soybeans that are nitrogen fixers that help put nitrogen back in the system, and that's still a practice that's used today.
Yes, and peanuts.
Yeah,
cover crops, clover.
Yeah,
all sorts of legumes.
A lot of organic farms they rely on this cover crop system to mineralize and put nutrients back in their soil. No-till farming is a great practice for doing this, helping to maintain that soil development, letting your cover crop like a loam or pea or something put that nitrogen back in there. But then they learned about using animal waste, right? I mean, there was
manure.
And it's been a classic nitrogen source for a long time.
Probably since the advent of agriculture itself, there's been this, married couple of animals and crops. And yes, it's been a huge thing. And they talked about how the Chinese were like the best at it.
Oh yeah.
For centuries.
Well, when they were farming rice, they would put fish into their rice fields so that the fish waste would feed the rice as it was growing.
And we use fish waste today as a fertilizer. It's highly effective.
Super effective.
Really great for soil. And they'd use ducks, the oxen for plowing the fields, like all the manure.
Yeah.
Would be utilized in some fashion. And it's still in some areas a very used practice today, those same things.
Well, it is a terrific natural way to enrich your soil, get nitrogen sources in there. But at the end of the day, it still is not potent enough to feed humanity at the rate that we've grown. Like we couldn't feed the whole world on pure, animal feces. And like we have to have a more advanced process. And that's where this book really leads you. It gives you the backdrop on where we were. But then as population was growing, we were, quickly the governments were like, hey, at this rate, we're going to be out of food real fast because we can't produce enough with this current practice of producing food. We've got to find something else. We've got to develop. And that's where, you later on in the book, you discover that it was the necessity of feeding the people that was the main driver for the development. It wasn't like these entrepreneurs like, hey, let's go and smash some atoms together and see what happens, and boom, some nitrogen.
Right.
It was a need. They had a very strong motivating factor.
And of course, as we grow in civilization and humanity, I think in a lot of ways, we've increased in efficiency in doing so.
Yeah.
But even as they talk about in the Alchemy of Air, with increased efficiency in creating fertilizer, right, there is consequences.
Oh,
that lead to a plenty that are, sometimes you just can't see it until it happens.
Right. Well, I mean, in the book, they talk a lot about Germany, right? Mm-hmm. And
because that's where it comes from.
Right.
The Haber-Bosch system is what it's called. And it was two Germans. One was Jewish.
Robert and Bosch. Yeah. And what's fascinating is that the initial development, or the need to develop a synthetic fertilizer, came from the most humble beginnings possible. Like they had the most purest and possible intentions to feed their growing population. And that was it. They were literally just trying to figure out a method to grow more food on a limited amount of land that they had that was arable and could support agriculture. They didn't have a large colonial empire like Britain did, where they could, grow food abroad and bring those resources back into Britain. They had just Germany. That was it.
And also a little more of self-reliance.
Yeah.
Because they did bring nitrate fertilizers in.
Right.
Right. And, they're thinking like, how can we create a system to have our own?
Oh, yeah. Because they were so reliant on the trade around the world to support their agriculture. If somebody interrupted that trade, they would be stuck.
Well, from what it sounded like, they're reliant on everything in the world for their country, just about, right? Probably except for beer.
Yeah, beer. Well, yeah. I mean, so they were reliant on saltpeter that came from abroad to furnish, making war, gunpowder. They were reliant on the nitrogen, the bat guano, and the bird poo that was farmed or mined in South America and Africa. Like, they were relying on all these different sources of bringing raw goods into Germany that they had no alternative for. And so, like, the German, chemists are like, hey, we need to, one, figure out a way to feed ourselves.
Yes.
And two, like, we need to not be reliant on such a delicate, balanced system that at the time, the natural sources of nitrogen were thought to be running out. And so they were literally racing against time between their people about to, they thought were about to starve, or them creating a way to keep everybody alive through a synthetic nitrogen to feed their farms.
Which, kind of jumping off into a different section of this, until I listened to this book, had no clue about how deep the nitrogen economy was.
Yeah.
Right. The selling, the slavery involved. Right. And we talk about stripping land of resources, and yes, they would go through and like totally demolish areas to get certain resources. Like the guano.
Yeah.
Right. And it just, I never knew, I'm a person who fertilizes lawns. And what I knew in the beginning was I buy it from the store, in a sense, just like everyone else.
Right.
Didn't know there was such a vast history over nitrogen, dude.
So one of the things I found was so fascinating. They had found several islands. I think there was one off in New Guinea and a couple other places that were these just perfect little bubbles in both the climate and the bird population, where over hundreds of years, they developed literal mountains of bird poop. And then some poor sailor was, I guess, searching for a nitrogen source, stumbled upon this giant mountain of bird poop. And they're like, hey, let's see if we can grow some crops with this. And Lord and behold, it was one of the best ways to grow crops.
Isn't it fascinating how we stumble across stuff?
Yeah.
Throughout history? Yes. Just, and it stinks. See what happens.
But just the bird poop source alone was a source of so much heartbreak and war. I mean, the U.S. government literally... they did something like, it was like they made it to where ordinary citizens could go out and traverse the oceans, and if they found an island containing the bird poop, they could claim that as a U.S. island. And that is still a law in the books today. Like, it never went away. It's just not utilized because there's no unknown islands left.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, it had been a while since I had first listened to the book, and I'm jumping back in. Right. So where I had jumped in recently, I was halfway in it, and it really starts diving into the other part of the history of Haber and Bosch themselves.
Yeah.
And to think how one thing that had such pure intentions, with
incredibly pure intentions,
right, with the nitrogen feeding people, again, using that term, turning air into bread, turned air into fire.
Turned it into war.
Turned it into war.
Just, it's incredible. I mean, technology that is developed with great intentions, that's in the hands of good people, can make the world such a better place. I mean, it really can be terrific.
And it does all the time.
All the time.
Right? There is beautiful things happening. So we're not here to like set this doom and gloom feeling over everything. But
no, I think
there is the reality of
there is. And
they were blowing shit up with nitrogen, man.
These guys, they stumbled upon this. And like when war came knocking, or when they had to prepare for war, they capitalized on this new nitrogen source. They figured it out. And not only were they able to feed their population, but they had such an excess of nitrogen that they were able to take this ammonium nitrate and manipulate it into making bombs. And, if it hadn't have been for this Haber-Bosch process, World War I would have been over real fast.
And World War II
would have been over fast too. Like, because
even faster, maybe.
Hitler had no natural sources of oil. They had tons of coal. I mean, Germany has long been very coal rich, but no oil and gas. And so they had figured out a way to manipulate this Haber-Bosch nitrogen process to take that material from coal, put it through the Haber-Bosch system, and push out a synthetic gasoline that they could power their war machine with. But this is, I think, one of the underlying notes of the entire book that they don't really talk about, but they're also kind of talking about the entire book through, is how much there is a responsibility put on us as just people, making sure that things that are intended for the good of mankind are used for the good of mankind and not for our destruction. There's so many things in our modern day and age that in the hands of wrong people who wish ill intent upon the world can cause some serious damage, but they also have the ability to make beautiful things happen.
And it can be like things that are so simple that we use every day, right? You can drive to work, take a trip in a car.
Yeah.
You can run someone over.
Yeah.
Get scary, right? You go hunting, do cool stuff, and, unfortunately kill people with guns, right? So like so many things can be used in those ways. And I know you and I share some similar views, even in our own business, on this approach and how we do things. Because it'd be so easy to tap into the big marketed, treat and defeat. I got to kill this.
Absolutely.
Right. But we both, drive a hard bargain against it of like, hold on.
There's a better way.
There's a better way. And even some of these ways, do we even really need to do that, period?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and this is the problem, right? It's like when you look at the Haber-Bosch system, right? This is a method by which man figured out how to synthetically create a fixed nitrogen. So to just give a little bit of background for this, guys. So there's nitrogen all around us. Like most of our atmosphere is nitrogen. We're breathing it
right now.
The problem with it is that this nitrogen that we're breathing in that exists in our atmosphere, it's inert. It has no ability to do anything but exist in that state. It cannot be manipulated without a tremendous amount of effort.
Which usually happened in nature through lightning.
Yeah. You need
before this system
giant release of electric energy to release, and it does. I mean, previous to humans, nitrogen was put into the soil primarily through lightning, and that soil would absorb the nitrogen and then it would start working through the system, right? But because we didn't plow our fields, that nitrogen system more or less stayed in the soil, right? Like once it got there, it fed one crop cycle, that died out, fed the next. Like it just stayed there.
And to add to your point, the way that soil biology works, it's a very good recycling system.
Very good recycling.
Right. So it does a great job at retaining things, but how we, even in the simplest ways, mow the grass and bag it
Yeah.
You're like throwing away so much nitrogen
Yeah.
every time you bag the lawn, right?
Yeah.
You're not just plowing the fields. It's not the plowing of the fields necessarily that does have a whole nother world of impact.
Oh, yeah.
But we're taking the crops away. And what is the main source of how those crops grew?
It's nitrogen.
Nitrogen.
But it's not just nitrogen, right? So nitrogen, we learned, is really this amazing catalyst for our soil. You know, it's like you can't grow plants successfully on just a soil packed full of nitrogen. It's all the other elements in the soil that get excited and work freaking amazingly better just by having nitrogen present for the system. It is just this amazing catalyst that takes the potassium and the phosphates and gets them all excited, and the plants are all jiving and they're doing their thing.
Yeah, totally. So thank you for pointing that out, because you're right. Like it is NPK on fertilizer bags for a reason.
Absolutely.
And as these companies have gotten a better understanding of how plants and soil work, you have, you know, phosphorus and potassium. And then you have other companies that started adding calcium and magnesium and manganese. And then you got companies that are, I think, far ahead, like Microlife, right? Who's got tons and tons and tons of things with more minerals and things that help with enzymatic processes. So that whole world runs deep.
Very deep.
Right. But to go back to, it is nitrogen.
It is nitrogen.
Like you said, is the catalyst.
Yeah.
I like how he says it in the beginning of the book. He said, like, nitrogen is spicy. It does all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's spicy. It really is.
Nitrogen is a part of what helps our DNA twist.
Yeah. It's incredible.
That blows my mind. There's nothing on Earth that's alive that doesn't have nitrogen embedded in its code.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Boom.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, lightning.
Thank you, lightning. So this is going to be way off, and however people feel about it, whatever. But kind of makes me think of like Genesis in the Bible.
Yeah.
Where he talks about like he breathed life into Adam, I think.
Oh, this is good.
Right?
Yeah.
So now I'm, after listening to the book and air into bread, like we were breathed life into, because what is air mostly? The nitrogen.
Yeah.
And what is a part of our DNA code? Nitrogen.
Yeah.
That thought just,
oh man,
my head, you know,
dude. So one of the things that and we'll keep this subject short because I don't know everybody's audience or whatever.
Right.
But one of the things that in my walk with Jesus, I found so interesting to learn is that the original like translation for God, right? The way that it was spoken was an attempt at putting letters in a word to breath. Like trying to put letters to that. Like that's what God is. Like it's breath, it's life.
And yeah, just that whole kind of putting all that together. Nitrogen is in the air. It is the most abundant thing in the air. And what were we breathed into?
Yeah.
The breath
of life.
Yeah.
Deep.
So that's a whole thing right there.
It's a whole rabbit hole. We'll dive down to that rabbit hole later.
Yeah.
We'll finish this rabbit hole we're in right now.
Yes. So jumping back in, this system that has been created, now there's huge plants all over the world. And I find it fascinating, really cool, a little bit scary how in the book they use the term like drinking rivers and breathing in just all the air.
Yeah.
Right. It's a lot of resources, and then it gets turned back out, but we don't see it. We don't.
So we're getting back into that responsibility aspect of this system, right? So there's so much great good that can come from us putting nitrogen, even synthetic nitrogen, into our soil systems to produce enough food to feed the planet, right? super important. We've got to keep people fed. Like we can't have starvation. Like that's a no-go. But at the same time, I don't think that we've been the best stewards of this process to not abuse this nitrogen to cause harm to our planet. I think that we're seeing some really sound evidence to say that our farming practices to feed the massive population has overutilized nitrogen or not cared for the soil and the runoff in a proper way to not cause ill effects to other parts of the ecology and the river systems. Like we're seeing, there's areas of the earth now that at the mouth of rivers and their estuaries, that there's just dead zones. There's nothing living there anymore because there's so much runoff and so much excessive nitrogen that, like, even if you took a completely organic approach, let's say you had a child and that child was never fed anything that had synthetic nitrogen in it when it was produced, you would still have synthetic nitrogen in your blood because there's so much in our environment now. That's unavoidable.
Right. Which that blows my mind. And the not understanding nitrogen cycles, not understanding bigger cycles of a small even environment or an ecosystem, right? And as we look at cycles like on a little graph, lots of things can have closed systems.
Absolutely.
But we don't close that system, and we need to learn to like close the gap and make it much more efficient to where it does stay more contained. Every time you talk about dead zones in the ocean, I really want to jump off and be like, yo, it's called eutrophication, and it's aquatic hypoxia, and it creates a lot of nasty things in those environments, which really trickle out big time, can poison fish and seafood, creates food poisoning. Yeah. So it's never just, oh, this happens over here. No, everything happens like everywhere. Yeah. Right? Like string theory.
Yeah. Well, the one thing though, like I don't like, without trying to be like too gloom and doom over this, like it is a very serious problem that needs a solution to it. But I do take a bit of comfort in thinking about how the Earth's systems have been observed to work, right? We know that when the Earth systems are out of balance, it's really good at like creating a yin to that yang, right? It's like if we throw something over here, the Earth is pretty good at throwing something else up to counteract it, right? So
it really is.
I would be really interested to see, and we probably won't live long enough to see this happen, but maybe we will.
Maybe we can make it happen.
Maybe we can make it happen. But like, what is going to be the yin to the yang on the dead zones, right? What natural process can be manipulated or enhanced to counteract this? Or does it simply just require a change of agricultural approach? Like, do we just need to change? Or
we definitely need to change.
And is it both?
But we're coming to the end of this segment here. We're definitely going to have a part 2 diving into this and like looking and talking about different ways where, we think we could improve this approach. Justin, but real quick, man, where's your place at?
Okay. So Grippon Gardens is, in my opinion, the best little garden center in League City.
It is for sure.
We are off of Highway 96 on a road called Pecan Orchard Road. Our address is 2060 Pecan Orchard Road. We specialize in having plants that thrive in this Gulf Coast climate. And we carry a complete line of organics. We've got options for everything. One of my approaches as we have brought products in to offer to our clientele is that, yes, there are some chemical things that we carry, but I'm going to carry an organic option for you on almost every scenario. I want to make sure that we take an organic approach first. There's so many ways to avoid chemicals, and I want to offer those ways.
Yes, I very much appreciate that. So if y'all are in the local area, League City, Friendswood, Dickinson, Webster, or even coming through from other areas of Houston, check out Grippon Gardens in League City, Okay, search them up on Google or Apple Maps to take you there.
Absolutely. We'll help you guys out. We can take care of all of your plant and aquatic needs.
And thank you so much for watching on the More Than Just Grass podcast. We will be back with a part 2 of this conversation very soon. Peace.
Peace.